All right, now let's talk about public goods. Now, I already talked about that at the beginning of this kind of market failure section, but a public good is typically defined as something which is non-excludable and non-rivalrous. But I like to think of it just as externalities on steroids. So street light is the classic example. It's the one I talked about before. A street light provides you some benefit, but the cost of the street light is far bigger than the benefit that you get. But there are so many people who use the streetlight, who walk down that street at night, who live in the buildings nearby, that all of their benefits added up together exceed the cost of the streetlight. So that's a huge external benefit. If I was coming up to you and saying you as the consumer of streetlight should be paying for this, you're going to go no way because it doesn't meet my benefit. But there's a huge positive externality to other people that's not being included if I'm just going to treat you, pardon me, as a consumer. So, how do we resolve this? Well, typically, we can't just give a bit of a subsidy because there's a huge gap. So, typically, governments step in and try and make the thing. Now, why is there such a huge gap? Why can't just a group of people come along and make it work? Well, typically, the problem is that it's very difficult to make a proper market from it because we're going to have a lack of excludability. So when you have markets, typically you want to be able to sell a good to someone or a service and actually decide that that person gets it. Whereas if something's non-excludable, then anyone can come along and take it. And so an example is street light, because without stopping anyone from accessing the street, anyone can just walk along and make use of the street light. Now, the other way that you can do things, where that you can try and sell things and make markets of things, is if they're rivalrous. So rivalrous means they get used up. They're rivalrous because it's almost like if one person gets it, the other person can't. So you're rivals for access for the goods. So if I produce something and then it immediately got used up as soon as I ate it or used it or whatever, then even if I wasn't very good at excluding other people from taking it, if once I use it up, then I can get the benefit. But if it's non-rivalrous, like with street light, because you don't just use it up when you use it, so other people can still benefit from it, then that's not the case. It's very difficult to make markets with public goods, because of these features of non-excludability and non-rivalry. So this is public good, this is what makes something a public good. And then typically we would say, hey, that's why government gotta come along and do it. That's the typical response. That's what most people end up saying. And that's a brief rundown on public goods. Now, what was I talking about with you can't stop other people coming along and using it without paying for it? What do we call that? We call that free riding, because you're using it, you're riding on it almost for free. So that's the free rider problem, is the fact that for goods that are not excludable and not rivalrous, anyone can come along and make use of it. There's a fun example, which you don't strictly need to know for the A level, but I think it's interesting, so I'm going to say it. Ideas can be thought of as public goods because they might be a bit excludable. To be fair, you can try and reduce the communication of ideas, but they're definitely non-rivalrous, because if I have an idea on how to do something a bit better and I tell you about it, you using that idea doesn't stop me using the idea, right? If I'm like, hey, this is a better way to make your coffee, the fact that I've told you doesn't mean that I can't use that way of making my coffee. And so it's non-rivalrous. And so it's a great way of achieving economic growth, because one person using it doesn't mean another person can't. So everyone can start using them. And then you make more ideas of how to do things better and everyone can start using them. Whereas you get more factors of production, you get more workers. Well, a worker used for one thing can't be used for another thing. A machine used for one thing can't be used for another thing. There's opportunity cost because there's rivalry with those sorts of factors of production. Ideas, this doesn't apply. And so then the question is, could you get a free rider problem with ideas? And typically we try and answer the free rider problem with ideas by saying to people, let's make them more excludable. So let's give you certain rights over the use of ideas and punish other people if they try and copy those ideas. And then that's making excludability so we can make a market for ideas. And so we can stop them being public goods with free riders who don't bother coming up with ideas but still benefit from them. So that's a somewhat more niche example of a public good, and trying to answer it by creating a market. There's also an answer, which is government-funded research for ideas, which is doing the sort of typical thing of, hey, the market's going to underprovide certain types of ideas, so maybe government should step in. And books like, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something like The Government Entrepreneur, some book like that. I'll find the name of it and stick it in the description if I remember. Which is basically saying like, hey, look at all this innovation that has come from government research, which is a fair point. Anyhow, so that's public goods. The thing that you need to remember is they're non-excludable, they're non-rivalrous. This means it's very difficult to make a market out of them, because how can you buy and sell things that can't just be packaged away and sold to one person? And so therefore, you're going to get people who try to free ride, who try to benefit from them without actually bearing the costs. And that's why the market will underprovide public goods. And that's why people typically say, hey, government, please come along and do some of this for us.